Deans Rossky and Thomas for taking their time out of their day to come here and assemble their insights and share those with us. And I'd like to introduce the moderator, Josh Eiler. Josh became director of Rice's Center for Teaching Excellence in August 2013. Prior to this, he'd been associate director at a similar center at George Mason University, and was also approved for tenure as a faculty member in English at Columbus State University in Georgia. Josh oversees all the CT's initiatives, which are designed to enhance and support teaching at Rice. On top of that, his projects include the book, How Human Beings Learn, A New Paradigm for Teaching in Higher Education, which is under contract with University of Nebraska Press. So please welcome Josh Eiler and our deans. Thanks.
Thanks, Fred. Once again, it's an honor to be here to moderate the second of our sessions with our distinguished speakers today. I'm going to introduce our deans in just a second. First, I want to talk a little bit about the format. We've shifted it a little bit for this session. Last time, the questions will be the same, but last time we alternated between each question. This time, our deans have prepared a presentation based on the three questions as a unit. So I'll introduce them, and Peter will go first, and then Ned will follow him. And then we'll open up the floor to Q&A after that, okay? So first, we have Peter Rossky, who is new to Rice this semester. He is our Dean of the Weiss School of Natural Sciences and the Harry C. and Olga K. Weiss Professor of Chemistry and Biomolecular Engineering. Peter joined the faculty at Rice this summer, and after 35 years on the chemistry faculty at the University of Texas at Austin. He received his undergraduate degree in chemistry, summa cum laude, from Cornell University and his PhD in chemical physics from Harvard. He's published more than 250 papers in the fields of biophysical chemistry, solution chemistry, molecular spectroscopy, computer simulation, and theoretical chemical physics, with emphasis on the application of theory and computation to elucidate the molecular level description of solution reactions, molecular association, and quantum effects on condensed phase chemistry. I told myself that if I said that all very fast, it would sound like I knew what the words meant. So he has received a number of recognitions for his research contributions, including election as a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences and the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. Please welcome Peter Rossky.
Oh, okay.
Not so fast. They're eager to dive into these meaty questions that we provided for them. Next, our second speaker will be Ned Thomas, who's the Dean of Engineering and the William and Stephanie Sick Professor of Engineering, and also a Professor of Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering and of Chemistry. Dean Thomas came to Rice from MIT, where he was head of the Department of Materials Science and Engineering, the founding director of MIT's Institute for Soldier Nanotechnology, and professor of Materials Science and Engineering. Thomas was appointed the William and Stephanie Sick Dean of Engineering at Rice in 2011 and holds joint appointments in the Departments of Materials Science and Nanoengineering. He's an active research team and is currently focused on using 2D and 3D lithography, direct write, and self-assembly techniques for creating metamaterials with unprecedented mechanical and thermal properties. Dean Thomas is passionate about promoting the three ships of engineering: leadership, internship, and entrepreneurship. And I'm especially grateful to Ned because he's been an early and active proponent of the work of the Center for Teaching Excellence. So I'm thankful for that as well. Before I invite Peter to the podium, I'd just like to refresh our memories of what the three questions were that were designed by Scientia's programming panel for our deans to consider. The first was, what is the biggest challenge and or opportunity in teaching facing your school? Second was, what is the role of technology and pedagogy in your school, and how do you envision that changing in coming years? And the third was, how can your school have a positive impact in teaching across the entire campus? So first Peter will speak, then I'll invite Ned up, and then we will open the floor to Q&A. Peter.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. Is this working okay? Thank you. Well, it's an honor to be asked to speak here. And I was in thinking about what I was going to say, I realized that one of the most important things about inviting a dean to speak about something is it forces him to think about it. And I learned a lot in the process of sort of crystallizing my ideas, and I'll talk about it. I should preface it by saying that in the context of technology, when I say something that is skeptical, you should take that in the context of the fact that I started doing computations in about 50 years ago, and I've always used computers, so it's not that I'm a technophobe. I'm a lover of technology, but I've seen a number of things come and go, as many of you have. So I tend to be a little bit hesitant on some things until I'm convinced that's the right thing. So I want to start out by pointing out something that's very important, and that is that teaching and learning in natural sciences and in engineering could not be more important than it is at this time. This is from a fairly recent, it's just the cover page from a fairly recent report from the Presidential Council of Advisors on Science and Technology, where their projections were that you would actually need to generate 1 million graduates from STEM fields in universities in 10 years to meet the projected demand. And I mean, it's a mind-boggling number. And that will enter into the issues of what the challenges are. So if you ask what is the biggest challenge and opportunity, one of the 3 questions we were posed, there are 2. The one that's relevant to that first slide is the issue of retention. Retaining students in natural sciences is an issue. I'm sure there are many people here who would say, well, there's an obvious reason natural sciences isn't very interesting. But to those geeks among us, nothing is more interesting than that. But there are other issues associated with the difficulty associated with preparation and so on, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And the other challenge is a quite substantial one, and is one that's increased over time, and that is the massive number of people that need or want to take natural sciences courses. So this is the numbers that we, for other reasons, had accumulated very recently from 1 year ago, from the last previous year. And in an average semester, not over a year, but in a semester, there were 5,500 individual enrollments in natural sciences courses. 1,900 of those people were enrolled in a laboratory, which is, you're looking at then at about 6 hours a week of supervised safety and experimental lab time. So it's a very large number of people to start thinking about how do you enhance their educational opportunities. And we all know that if I went to the upper administration and said, I have an idea, we'll split all those people into classes of 19 each. And all we'll have to do is quadruple our size of our faculty, and I think we could do it if they doubled their teaching load. It just isn't an option, right? So one has to come up with some more, let's say, creative solutions, and I'll talk about a little bit about that. So the most popular thing, and one which has great data supporting it at this point, goes under various names, but most people call it the flipped classroom. I learned quite recently from the people who helped me put this talk together that it's probably more correctly described as active learning. That is where you don't sit passively in a room and listen to a lecture like we are now, but you sort of fill in that part on your own before you come to class, and then use the class time for a much more interactive process. Often involving peer instruction, that is students working together. I found it sort of amusing that while I was thinking about this course, I got my alumni newsletter from Cornell, and this is the lead on the first page. New teaching model is a game changer. Active learning, it says down here, it's not very well focused, active learning initiative. And this is from last week. So it's, as all of you I think know, it didn't start last week. It started 10 or 15 years ago. And there's a lot of good data. And this is taken from an article. And what it shows is the probability of retaining someone in a STEM field, it's actually the probability that you'll lose them. It's the loss probability. Depending on their math scores, which I think about 20 years ago I was aware that that's the best correlator with success in natural sciences courses, is the entering math score, but also how they're taught, traditional or involving some element like this flipped classroom where there's a lot of interaction in problem solving. And I think all of us who successfully maneuvered through natural sciences majors discovered that the way to do well in the field was to practice on problems, so you could get the sense of how everything went into things. So the data is really very striking that in the first year, the difference between a freshman coming in with the same SAT score who is taught with the traditional lecture versus the flipped situation where they learned a lot of the rote stuff outside of class is enormous. And what's even more interesting is the fact, which I wouldn't have necessarily been able to predict, that if you have this interactive type of learning, that you can have a much lower math score and still be just as likely to stay in the field. And that's maybe more important because it gives you a broader group of people who have the opportunity to move forward in science. Obviously, when you get to upperclassmen, the probability they drop out of the field is much lower, but it's still, even with a perfect math score, this is the old scoring system, it's a factor of 2 more likely that you'll stay in the field if you have this interactive type of learning. So it's very, very compelling data. So the thing that I wanted to emphasize was some of the pitfalls of this model that everybody puts forward as the flipped classroom, in which you take you prepare all of the basic information that you have to learn about equations and stuff, and that's all provided to the students outside of lecture, and the lecture or the group of people getting together is focused primarily on problem-solving experiences. And that is that if you go to a typical faculty member who's one of your people that really understands research and everything that makes for a great class, and you say, how about you flip a course? And you say, well, it'll only take you about 25 hours a week for a year or two. They'll say, it's a great idea, I don't have time. And you certainly don't want to seek out the professors that have that kind of spare time and say, you should be in there teaching, right? Flipping classes. You want your best people doing it. And so this enormous barrier that you create because of the enormous investment produces something where you'll get very few flipped classes. And you may get some there are many of top researchers who are very dedicated to teaching, and they'll just work the extra 25 hours a week on top of their original 70, and they'll get it done. But it's not ideal for actually moving in that direction. The other thing which I feel personally a lot about is that this kind of flipping everything really limits your flexibility. I find that when I teach a class, and I'll talk about one in a minute that I teach, that when I go into the classroom and I talk about things, I do everything I can not to follow the book, but to add to the book in ways that I personally think makes things clearer. And the flipped classroom doesn't provide the ideal flipped classroom in the simplest sense doesn't provide an opportunity for that. So there is, I think, a growing realization that there are a lot of advantages to something that was a mixed representation of these two things. That is, where you flip only some course elements. You don't eliminate lectures. You just make them focused on higher level concepts. So the advantages are the amount of time invested. If, say, I'm going to just take some of the problem sets and have them discussed separately outside. This doesn't take that much work. It requires a modest amount of time. You can do this flipping incrementally and stop at any point, and you still have a very functional class. And the other thing which is very important is, I mean, if I went through this whole flipping process and it didn't work, I would just want to shoot myself, right? And so if you can do it in a gradual way, you can experiment. What if we had the groups of 40, if we had groups of 20, if we had groups of 10? Is there a difference in at least a perception by the students? And so this ability to experiment without enormous investment is very valuable. And this last thing is, again, is a personal thing. If somebody said to me, I'd like you to run this class, and your lectures you're going to use are from, Peter Walness in the chemistry department, I'd go, but Peter doesn't teach like me, and I don't want to teach that. I want to teach the way I like to teach it. And if everything's on a video or in a book, the way someone else did it, it might not appeal to me. It might not, from my point of view, be the best pedagogy. So having a mixed representation of things gives me the opportunity to include my own style and preference. So this is a case study. This is a course I taught at UT, where I was for a very long time, and it was my favorite course to teach, and it was honors freshman chemistry. And this was basically the top 2% of the entering natural sciences class, which at UT is about 75 people. And they're a remarkably talented group of people. Average test scores, typically 92 or 93 averaged over the whole class on a really demanding test. But it's a large class to a school the size of Rice. And so it presents an interesting example because you can say, okay, if I wanted to take a typical large class at Rice, this might be a model of how you could take our great Rice students and flip the class incrementally and think about it, how you're going to do it, and how you're going to do it economically. So the content of the class, I taught it, I think, 5 of the last 6 years I was there. There was lectures, but in the lectures I didn't do any problem solving. I didn't go through any of the examples in the book. I would talk about the concepts and how the theory connected to these concepts and how they related to each other with a lot of questions. So it's almost flipped, but not really, because I had this size of a group talking to, but with a lot of interaction. The thing that was added was, so this was added about 10 years ago for the honors class, was called an intensive course seminar. But really it amounted to just what you see in this picture, students working together, students working with either a faculty member or some other kind of mentor, where they were given challenge problems and given the time and said, solve them, and we'll help you when you get stuck. And this peer mentoring or peer instruction was remarkable, and it also allowed people to sort into groups where they felt comfortable with the other people they were interacting with. The people that complained that the tests were too easy were off in a corner trying to solve something else and doing it. And the people who really were challenged by the questions they had in front of them would work together, and it was very, very effective. The thing that is interesting that I'm not sure has been thought about here is that you can staff these kind of courses relatively inexpensively, and it is an issue, right? I've heard the comment here that if we did this kind of thing, we would need a lot of TAs. The idea being you take a class of 80, split it into 4 or 5 sections, that's 4 or 5 TAs. But what we did, which worked really well, was, so you had the one faculty member who were in charge of everything and did the lectures. We had a graduate student for the lecture to answer questions and grade. Another one who managed this seminar, but the people that handled the breakout sessions were these amazing undergraduates that had already had this class, alumni of the class. And what the program involved teaching for credit. It was a credit course, experience in teaching. And it was run by, it could be run, for example, by the people in this group. And there was a wait list of outstanding students who wanted to do this. And they were good at it, and they were involved, and they showed up. And I was a little skeptical at the beginning, but I decided that this was an outstanding way to do it. And they did it essentially for free. They did it because they wanted teaching experience and the credit. So by investing one graduate student, you could actually do this effectively. So I think there were years that I had to turn away really good undergraduates because there were just not enough jobs for them all. So what is the role of technology? There are some completely obvious things, and they've been done for a long time. Online lab demonstrations, I'm sure they've gotten much more sophisticated than they used to be, but demonstrating how you use an instrument or what the calculations are in an instrument in a laboratory, that kind of thing as a pre-quiz before you go into the lab is a very old, it's been around 20 years or 30 years. The ability to do calculations online and have it give you feedback. Now you can buy little boxes in Toys R Us that do this, right? The thing that is important, and I've read different things, video lectures that kids being the students, like to see videos more than they like to read a book. But I think it's much deeper than that. I brought along a prop. And the prop is the book that is often used teaching physical chemistry, a 1 or 2 semester course. And if you try to assign a reading assignment out of this and say, read that, and then we'll do problems, it is extremely difficult to get something compact out of that book because the guys who wrote it didn't want anybody to not buy it because what they wanted wasn't in the book, right? That's all textbooks are, that is the most important principle of a book. Don't exclude any customers. So in this 1,000-page book has everything you could ever want to include in a PChem course. And it is very hard. You have to be very specific, this part of this page and that part of that page. And it's hard. It's awkward for the student. In a video lecture, if it's done by the person teaching the course or somebody with exactly the same style, you can put just what you want into it. And I think that's an enormous thing. Or you have to write the book yourself. Both of those are somewhat time consuming. What I don't like about online lectures is that when you're talking about things like physical chemistry, there's a lot of equations. And when I look at an equation, because I'm a theorist, it talks to me, right? I look at it and I understand what all these terms are doing and why they're there, and why there's a 2 in front of one of them, and for physical reasons. And that's normally not in a book. And by having a discussion with people, you can get a lot of questions back and forth, so people then feel like the equation makes sense. It's not just some piece of math anymore. Again, on experiments, you will hear right now debates about how much of an experimental thing you can replace with simulated laboratories, where you do it on a computer. And what you hear is the theorists say, oh, we could just do that on a simulation. And the experimentalists say, you have no idea. I mean, they get heated about it in faculty discussions, because you can't replace the experience of doing a lecture, and especially the experience doing an experiment, and especially the experience of having messed it up and realized what you did wrong. It's like learning to fix a car. When you strip a couple bolts, you learn how to use the wrench better, right? So this kind of learning experience with hands-on is really important in the lab. And labs are, unfortunately, very expensive to run, but they're very critical if you're training a scientist. Now, technology, I said I was a little bit skeptical. The reason is I lived through the part where people said, everything has to be taught on PowerPoint. It's the way, it's clear, you can hand it out to the class. And then people found that when they taught with PowerPoint, everybody falls asleep, because everything has the same level of importance on the slide. And they all know that they can get it later on a sheet of paper. So I think that one has to be very cautious about what you implement and how fast, mainly because it's a lot of work to roll out technology, and it's very expensive. And if you put all that effort and money into it, and then 3 years later they go, it's just not working, we'll have to put another $3 million into it and start over, it's not a very effective way to do it. So I think this has to be done cautiously, except in these completely clear-cut cases. So I want to wrap up with the last question, but I took the opportunity, let's call it, to change the question a little bit. Because the question was, how can your school have a positive impact in teaching across the campus? And I changed it to impact on learning across the campus. And it's my feeling that I know when I was an undergraduate, I had these great conversations with people in philosophy and English about the uncertainty principle and what it really meant. And did it really mean that destiny was uncertain and we couldn't know what was going to happen? Or did it not mean that? Was Isaac Newton wrong? And it was fun to talk about those things. And I think going back and students talking to each other, science students talking to non-science students, is a great way for really excited science students to be the messengers of science. Get everybody else a little bit caught up on the science, maybe interested in understanding it more. And the Rice colleges present an outstanding environment in which to do that because they are mixed and people all go back to the same place every day and have their cohort, right? So I just ended up by putting up here a quote. This is actually an organization who's dedicated to K through 12 education, but I think the thought is very clear that we live in an era of constant scientific discovery and technological change, which directly affects our lives and requires our input as citizens. So something I'm sure you've all heard many times, that maybe even from some people in the state government about how they didn't understand science. But the fact that to be a competitive nation, a broad understanding of science is very important. And I think that good natural science students can be these messengers. So that was the third question. I want to thank a couple people that really helped fill me in on this. Dr. Captcha, who works with me as my science communicator in natural sciences, and an individual, I don't know if she's here, but I haven't met her yet, but turned out it works in the secondary science teaching program at Rice, helping teachers in HASD and other areas who had a wealth of information and shared it with us. And finally, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Peter. Next, we'll have Ned.
Okay, for time.
So I'll start off by saying it's a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to follow Peter. I had no real idea what he was going to say. But I knew he'd talk about science because he's the Dean of Science and I'm the Dean of Engineering. So let's see what's on my slides. STEM has science and engineering in the S and E pieces, and it's very important. And it takes about 8,000 eighth graders to get either a Peter or a Ned. That's a pretty large number of students who don't make it through to a PhD. And that's Norm Augustine, who was CEO of Lockheed Martin, said that. So we heard a little bit about Peter's view of the Internet University, maybe, or MOOCs. And he didn't really talk about MOOCs, I guess. You didn't say MOOCs. Okay, so he didn't talk about MOOCs. And I'm not going to talk about MOOCs, but read this thing through. You know, lectures, asynchronous, free, world-class professors, SAGE on the stage, certificates of completion, and we will know who you are, right? We will test your ID, or your DNA, and you can pass an exam and get credits. Probably this will be private universities doing this, not state. And who the hell needs departments in tenure? It'll just be a few world-class sages on the stage. Then comes the but. Okay, when you do it on the internet, you're not in contact with other humans, or at least not very many. There's no interactions or few interactions, no hands-on practical stuff, so you can't screw up the lab experiment because you're not doing the lab experiment. Little teamwork. And I wanted to bring us back to, I wasn't around, but I'm sure that one day in the past, somebody at Harvard said, they've invented radio. This is going to change everything. Because one professor at Harvard will give a lecture on physical chemistry. The entire country will be able to listen to this for free, and they will learn so much from radio that universities will change. Didn't happen. Television comes along. I said, oh, that's the key. If they could not just hear them, but see them, it'd be just like being in the lecture halls at Harvard. It'll change everything. Didn't happen. Now comes the internet. ain't going to happen either, right? There's something about being in, it's like theater, right? Live theater is very different than going to the movies. So I'm not so sure that the Internet University is going to be the change-all. There'll be some good features of it, because radio's a good thing, television's a good thing, the Internet's a good thing, but it's not a cure-all. So let's talk about engineers. So if you go back in history, if you look at this guy, he's actually pounding a sword. So artisans, trial and error, learn by doing, apprenticeships. That's how engineers used to learn. Then around the 20th century, we got smarter. We went and started making handbooks and charts, and engineers were people who could suggest to you steam tables, for example. I don't know, any old enough people to do steam tables? Yeah, right. So, they don't do steam tables anymore, but they were there. And it was handbooks, and it was knowledge, not quite an apprenticeship anymore. But then physics comes along, and let's talk about transportation. So here's the Wright brothers, Kitty Hawk, 1903. And 66 years later, we're on the damn moon. Wow. Talk about a technological change in a short period of time. You could be alive in 1903 and alive in 1969, and you went from that thing to something, the Eagle has landed, right? Houston, the Eagle has landed, right? So a lot of physics and electronics, right? You can't do this without communications and computers. So 21st century, we're just starting it. Biology, information, and to be continued, right? We don't know what we don't know, but it's going to be fun. And it's accelerating, right? So this to this was a very fast acceleration. And the mainframe to the desktop to the laptop to the iPhone to wearing it, where is it going next, right? Chips in the brain and things we can't even think of. So let me go not so far back, because I'm not old enough to have been banging on swords, on anvils. And notice the top of the slide. Engineers build things that serve society. So engineers build stuff. 1960s, kind of a revolution in engineering, where they went from the steam tables and a lot of handbooks and apprenticeship to engineering science. So science and mathematics and the rigor of actually being able to do things carefully, completely, came into engineering. So engineering started to have principles based on sound physics and sound chemistry and analytical capabilities based on rigorous mathematics. And that went on for quite a while. And about maybe 10 or 20 years ago, some people noticed that engineers weren't quite what they wanted. They weren't effective anymore. And what we're about now is building engineers who are effective engineers. And it's not that you abandon the engineering science and go back to practical stuff, or just do practical stuff, or just do engineering science. It's a blend. So you really need to be able to have a rigorous program based on the fundamentals and practical hands-on design build work. So I wanted to give you some feelings about how engineers look at things. And this is all about, you see the words see, visualize, define, and so forth. So this guy over here, he's got good eyes. This guy got very good eyes. He's wearing his hard hat. He looks at the system, and the key thing about engineering oftentimes is just to see that there's a system made up of components and how they interact and how they're interconnected. And then you have to model these somehow. Then you're tasked with some problems, and you have ideas, you check hunches, you test, analyze, reflect, rethink the approach. So you're doing things here, and you're not usually doing it as a single individual. You're doing part of a team. And you want to make things better, right? So the Wright brothers, they thought they had a cool thing. They were bicycle builders, right? Dayton, Ohio had a really nice bicycle shop, and they ended up flying the first plane. And now you've got, International Space Station is almost old hat. Creative problem solving. And do it as a team. Okay, so educating engineers in the modern world, it's about teamwork, it's about studio teaching, open-ended problem solving. I'd say, book knowledge is, there's book knowledge, right? But nobody's probably going to ask you to solve something that's in that book, or they're not going to pay you to solve something in that book because it's been solved. They're going to pay you to solve something not in that book, right? So you've got to have the ability to take that book knowledge and make it into working knowledge on new problems. And these problems are such that they're not hiring you as a single individual. You're part of a team, so you need interpersonal skills. Good thing that we should do more in engineering and science and in general is social responsibility and good ethics. Then when you're ready to do it, you have your idea, you design it, you implement it, you operate it, but actually probably when you're implementing and designing, there's feedback loops here. And it has to satisfy the client and stakeholders. So I like to tell the students, you don't get partial credit on landing an airplane. In fact, actually this guy Beam that I met, astronaut that lives here in Houston, what the hell's Beam's first name? Alan, yeah. He was Apollo 12. Apollo 11 got to the moon, landed, came back. All of those guys, he was talking to his 36 astronauts at the time. There was 12 teams of 3. Remember, one guy stays and orbits the moon while the other 2 go down and then come back up, and then they go all back to Earth. And he said that at the time, they figured that about the 4th or 5th team wouldn't die, and they would make it. Because the first team, they didn't know what they didn't know. They might be able to get to orbit around the moon, but never get back to Earth. And the next team would figure that one out, and they would actually get somebody to the moon, but never get back off the moon and get back to the orbiter. And the 3rd or 4th one, they might have re-entry problems. And so they were thinking about the best place to be in the queue was about 4th, right? Because the first few teams are going to die. And of course, they'll learn a lot, right? And they accepted that. And now, you know, damn technology is so good that the first team landed, no problem. Second team landed, no problem. Apollo 13, they had a problem, right? Houston, we have a problem. It was the 3rd flight that had problems, but no one died, right? They got it back. Anyway, satisfying clients and stakeholders is pretty important. Partial credit is not so good in real world problems. So let's talk a little bit about Rice. So we're trying to do things right now that are, you know, forward looking. So by the way, Josh, I completely ignored your questions, as you can see, right? That's what deans do. They ignore things, right? So training and educating professional, italicized, engineering leaders, italicized. So one of the things you want to do at Rice that maybe you don't want to do or can't afford to do other places that are really, really, really big is to put in leadership. Right? You're trying to do a lot of people and high throughput. And I don't know how you convey leadership across the internet real well. Right? Leadership is one of those hands-on kind of activities. So you have to have the right topics, the right kind of space and equipment, good plans. Mental attitude and culture is important, right? And Rice is kind of iconic, and it's an interesting place to be. The owls kind of get going here somewhere. Owls are wise, and they're also kind of a little bit flighty. So working hard, easy to do at Rice. Your kids do it. Work in teams, not so usual, and lead teams. I think one of the things for faculty, since most of us out in the auditorium are faculty and staff, students are not customers, they're clients. You don't just sell them something, right? You advise them. A client there's a financial relationship, but you know, if you have a financial advisor, it's different than somebody who, you know, is just taking your money and giving you a product and doesn't care. We need to do more of this. This is kind of obvious. And then there's the on-campus and off-campus experience. So Josh already talked about my ships: entrepreneurship, internship, and leadership. The Venn diagram of those 3 ships, a lot of overlap. And in fact, Rice wants to do, or should be doing, all 3 of these things, because this is what will attract the brightest and best students and the brightest and best faculty. And it's this faculty-student thing that goes around in a circle, right? The best students will come to Rice because we have the best faculty, which will attract the best students, and on it goes, right? So, and what do you want? People that are curiosity, a lot of curiosity, a lot of energy. Leadership's important, entrepreneurial, and persistent drive. That's another thing. You know, get stuff done. Nothing's impossible. So if you ask people in industry, what about engineers from Rice. They say, wow, you guys produce really smart kids. Well, that's because we take in really smart kids and we don't screw them up too much. So they have big brains, really smart, full of energy, but they're not very successful when they come to our companies. Because it isn't just technical abilities, it's character, motivation, determination, communication, teamwork, strategizing, taking responsibility, get it done no matter what. Land the damn airplane. Go to the moon and back, nobody dies. Right? That's delivering on things. So we have something called RCEL. It's not in the future, it's here. Rice Center for Engineering Leadership. There's the mission statement on the left. It's basically a 4-year curriculum that you'd sort of do in your spare time. Right? Now I got to tell you about spare time for Rice students, right? So we were talking about students and how many credits they accumulate. So the average number of credits for engineering is 153. Do you know what, if you checked yet? You should, but it's way, 120 to get a degree at Rice, but students on average with AP credits and stuff graduate with 153 out of the School of Engineering. And so then you can ask, well, who had the most credits? Last year there was one kid who took 225 units, plus they brought in 48 AP credits. That's 273 units in 4 years. Well, 48 AP credits, and got 2 degrees, one in electrical and computer engineering, and one in piano. Not a lot of double counting on those things. Now the kids that go into grad school for a joint PhD, MD program. So this is somebody who's total underachiever, right? So we've got these students who come to campus and they want to do a lot of things way beyond what you just do with classwork. So the RCEL is, there's actually courses in leadership, and a lot of it is hands-on experiences. I mean, if you want to be a leader, you got to try to be a leader. You have to have followers, and you have to try to lead. You have to fail, and you have to learn. Internships, that's one of the 3 ships. You want these internships in industry to see what real engineers are doing and participate and grow. And this thing takes about 4 years of co-curricular outside the classroom and sometimes inside the classroom. So OEDK, I know St. Maria is here. Where's St. Maria? St. Anne? Yep, they're right up in there. So these Oshman Engineering Design Kitchen has real-world challenges versus problem sets, right? There's a lot of problem sets in the back. Probably every chapter has a bunch of problems to solve. And the odd-numbered problems, the answers are in the back of the book. Well, what? I didn't mean to do that. Oh, come on. We're not interested in working on problems in the design kitchen in which the answers are in the back of the book. The answers are not on the internet. There aren't any answers yet. In fact, there might be no answer, or there might be 25 answers, or 1,000 answers, and which one's the one that meets your schedule and your budget and the space and the weight and all the rest of the constraints and the problem. And you do it in teams, and they're interdisciplinary. They're not all mechanicals or all bioengineers, mixed teams. You need professional mentors. These guys are, you're apprenticing to these masters, right? These craftspeople who know how to do stuff. So you want to hang around professionals that know how to be good engineers or good scientists. And you got to give them the tools and things that, this is a phrase I picked up from Maria Oden. The design kitchen is there to reduce the barriers to innovation. Have an idea and 10 minutes later try it and find out that it isn't that good an idea, but then you get another idea which is better, and on you go. Fail fast, fail often, and eventually you succeed. So these are some of the things that are in the design kitchen. I thought the fact that there's 4 sewing machines in there is kind of interesting. Again, it's sort of get it done no matter what. What do you need to build stuff? And so these are some of the tools in there. It's a maker space, right? And you want to be able to get stuff done. This is a bragging slide. There have been 50 teams that have won either national or regional or even international competitions coming out of the design kitchen. And these little circles up here show the number of teams. Whoa, what am I doing here? The number of teams and the number of students involved, up almost to 1,000 students last year, over 100 teams. Yeah, other interesting thing here is 5,300 visitors. So when you drop by over at the design kitchen and they don't pay attention to you, it's because you're number 5,301. And there's a lot of copycatting going on. So the design kitchen is being reproduced at other places, including at the Moody Arts Center, right? They're going to have a Moody Arts Kitchen which will not be exactly the same, but it'll be interesting to have. So one of the freshman design courses that is, Ann, did you start this? All by yourself? Okay, so NG 120 is for freshmen, because normally when you go to college and someone says, oh, you're an engineer, how's your engineering going? You say, well, I'm taking physics and math and chemistry and Psych 101, and then second semester I'm having math 2, physics 2, chemistry 2, biology, and swim test. So how's the engineering going? Ain't going at all. If you come to Rice, you can get into engineering sometimes because it's overcrowded. NG 120 is oversubscribed. But you know, here's the projects, client-based projects. All right, and the answer's not in the back of the book. So here's one of the client-based projects. Now, since some of you have computers here, why don't you, in the meantime, look up that YouTube thing. Start typing that in. I'm talking to you, right? Because it's really a cool video, and it's like 4 minutes, and I decided not to show it. But the ones that are prepared, you can watch this, all right? So here's your assignment, okay? Should you choose to accept it. If you are on this particular project, which is freshman design, you're told there's a 16-year-old boy. He suffers from a genetic disorder, and it causes him stunted growth and reduced strength and brittle bones. He's about 5 foot, 2.5 feet tall. He's got a 1-inch radius of motion from his torso that his arms can move. His maximum capacity for lifting is 3.6 pounds, which is not a heck of a lot that you can lift, beyond which he may break a bone. So he is not going to lift heavy objects for sure. His gripping force that he can, squeeze is 2.2 pounds of pressure. He's confined to a wheelchair, and that's the name of the wheelchair. He owns it. So you gotta, whatever you're gonna do, you have to make it fit on a Permobile K450. And right now, if he wants to go anywhere and do anything, somebody else has got to help him. And he wants to get independence. And there's certain things on the market already. I mean, you'd be silly not to look at what's out there. There's existing gripping aids and robotic things. So your goal is to make an improved reaching device with a simple user face that will allow him to do this, okay? And was it 4 years ago? This was a problem, right? Fall of 2000 and subtract 4, whatever it is. I don't know what year I'm in now. And these kids are still here. They're going to graduate as seniors, right? So they start out freshman design on this problem, and they're still working on it. They've got a company. They haven't flunked out of school, and they got some intellectual property, and it's a cool thing. And have you viewed the video? It's good?
Yeah, they're all from our residential college.
Oh, they're from your residential
Yeah.
college. Yeah. So you know those guys.
We do.
So this is true.
Yeah.
These guys say it's true. Okay, good.
We talk about it on like every tour.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? So they didn't know what the hell they were getting into when they came here, and they did stuff. I watched that video, and sometimes you start almost kind of losing the tears come, because the kid's sitting in this chair with a smile the size of Texas. Amazing. Okay, so teaching and learning in the University of Tomorrow. Now we're coming back to Josh. I actually paid attention just a little. And I'd say the University of Tomorrow is here today. It's Rice, all right? We're small enough we can just do this stuff. We don't have to ask permission, just go and do it, right? And some of it's already happening. Leadership, internships, entrepreneurship. I'm not going to talk about OwlSpark. I see Jack Gill here is a great entrepreneur. We got the Rice Business Plan Competition, largest business plan competition in the world. All this, what, $5 million in prizes, something like that. So there's a lot of things going on right now that other universities aren't doing yet. I think here's the answer to the balance here. The old engineering science stuff was great on this, but then there was no teamwork, there was no hands-on. We sort of lost our way. We want to go back to making some practitioners, maker spacers, and even in the client's world, engineers without borders, right? So kids go off to Nicaragua and build a bridge, a real bridge that real people are going to use crossing a stream. It better not fall down, right? That makes Rice look really bad. Plus, it might kill some people. So you have to not only know your knowledge deeply, but you got to be able to do things in the real world. I told you this a bunch of times. These kinds of questions, the solutions are not in the back of the book, ever. Online courses, so I wanted to come back to that. Wouldn't it be great that we could tell students who come to Rice that they could go anywhere in the world, not just to this university spring semester junior year because that university happens to teach thermodynamics out of the same book or physical chemistry out of this book, and Rice is using that book that semester, so you can go to that university. Instead, you go anywhere you want. So you don't go to Oslo to study thermodynamics. You go to Oslo to study Norwegian and reindeer, right? And you take all the courses that you normally would take at Rice online, asynchronously, from anywhere you can get the internet. That would be great. So that'll take some time to put lots of courses from Rice online. And maybe nobody but Rice students uses them. Because I don't care so much about making money and MOOCs and stuff. I think the ability to let people go anywhere they want. And then, I don't know if you know what the Nike, you know what Nike is? What's Nike?
Do it, Eugene.
Just do it, Nike. See, right? Nike, just do it. It's a short version of just do it. I think I scared her. I'll have to learn who these folks, are you engineers? Not yet. The answer's not yet. What?
After this presentation.
After this presentation, you're engineering. Okay. So anyway, I'm done.
Well, thank you both for those energizing presentations, rich in both ideas and potential for discussion. So we're going to open it up for Q&A.
Hi, I'm Elma Novotny, and I teach a flipped immunology course, and my students have access to my MOOC, and I have a number of them in here, and I thought maybe you might be interested in asking them what it's all about and how they enjoy the experience. Or don't. You're perfectly free. It's okay, Mr. Wynn. You can tell what went wrong. Here.
Well,
So who, I know I've got some of you. Ms. Paulson's in here, Mr. Lynn's in here, Ms. Lee's in here, got Ms. Gerald somewhere in here. So, I mean, I've got you guys in here. You're doing it, you know? So you are actually doing the kinds of things they're talking about. What does it feel like?
You've been put on the spot.
yeah, I've watched a little bit of those, and
They're getting the bonus points.
so what don't you like about them?
What don't you like? Yeah, that's good.
What would you change?
Hi, I'm Adriana. I'm in Dr. Novotny's immuno class right now. So I actually really like the flipped lecture. I think it's a great way to like learn information on your own time. It's really nice that you can like either speed up the videos or even pause them. So like in lecture, I know a lot of my past professors have gone like really quickly, and I've been like missing some of the information. But with the flipped class, Dr. Novotny like provides a lot of resources and like a lot of practice questions and stuff like that that are available that weren't available in a lot of my other classes that weren't flipped.
Thank you. Other questions? Okay.
Okay, I'm in the same class as well, and I really like watching the videos. I think the only problem with it would be, for me, is that the in-class experience isn't always as effective as, like, the online videos are great. That's where you get most of the learning done, and then sometimes in class you're not really learning, like, as much as you are outside of class. So I really get a lot of learning from watching a lecture in class and doing a lot of problems, but sometimes the like the lectures online on your own time are much more effective than class learning.
Thank you. Other questions?
Thank you both for your presentations. Two questions, hopefully related. First, what you share is kind of this overarching big picture, which as deans is expected. So how is this practically infused within the faculty and in the courses? And I think you shared a couple of examples of that, but is this the norm? Is every class like the NG 120? And then secondary to that, for graduate students, where do you see graduate students fitting into this picture of teaching and learning in the university?
So let's see. I'll take whatever I can. Since I go first, I get the answer to the easy stuff. The number of courses that are hands-on and innovative and so forth is limited. But if it's cool, other people will do it. Students start talking about it. It's gratifying to know that people are aware that some of the cool stuff that comes out of the design kitchen. And we have a problem, like graduate students want to go into the design kitchen, natural science students want to get into the design kitchen, and there's not enough room in there. We have plans to expand it yet again and probably yet again. But there should be many maker spaces on campus, and you know, the Moody Art Center, if they have a kitchen related to that, that would be very good. Doing things in teams and building things is a great way to test your knowledge of stuff, and whether it's effective knowledge. You know, just because you can solve some problem that is on the problem set, okay, that's kind of a basis for testing yourself, that you understand some of the kind of concepts, but then how do you use them in a new context? How do you go beyond what's in the textbook? And oftentimes on exams, as faculty see you put on something which has not been taught in recitation or on a previous problem set, and the good students can adapt and figure it out, and the other students who just kind of know how, as long as you give them, you know, the thing in a sort of standard context, in a standard way, they go, oh yeah, that's I know that, and then they can crank it out. I don't think we're doing very much in the way of learning when you actually can only do things that you've been shown. It's when you can do things you haven't been shown that's of value to society, and it's really satisfying when you do something new, right? When, I don't know, the research teaching piece here is kind of interesting, because as soon as you figure out something in research, you got to tell people about it. You got to give a speech, you give a poster, you give a paper, and you feel really good about it for maybe 6 weeks. And then you have to go solve another problem. That's the human condition. We love solving puzzles. And the more important the puzzle is, the more people it impacts, the more you feel good about it, right? And so another thing at Rice, and I'm kind of going off on tangents here, is that to make research and teaching sort of just blend together. Don't separate them. Let them merge together, make a diffuse boundary on purpose. And, you know, educational research, there's people here that are way better than Peter and I about knowing how people learn and so forth. They do it as a profession. But you want people to try experiments, right? And so, you know, try something. If it doesn't work, change it. And if it doesn't work, change it again. Don't try to make something perfect. Your turn.
Yeah, I would like to reinforce what Ned said about teams. I think that the research, when it's done at the highest levels, is always done in teams, because people have different expertise. And so getting experience working with other people to solve a problem is great. I think a lot of that is accomplished in these flipped classroom concepts, where students work together to solve a problem they've never seen before. Certainly in teaching that class, that honors class, I was a bit startled at the beginning that somehow I thought, well, these are the very, very best of the best. They should already know how to think about a problem, as opposed to trying to find a problem just like it in the book so they could copy it. But they didn't. And as a whole, they didn't. And so my common answer to them when they said, how do we solve this? I said, well, here's a hint. Think, and then try to do the problem. And they got it after a while, but because of the way most high school education is, which we're trying to change, right? That's the way they were taught in high school. So in terms of kitchens, I mean, there's also a discussion of having a biodiscovery kitchen where people can try out biological experiments to see. And I think this is really good, because that's really what we want our students come out at the end, is the ability to take something they've never seen before and be able to put together the knowledge they have and form a new idea. And that's, in some sense, what graduate students come out being able to do at the end. I think there was a comment about graduate student participation. I view the educational system as having a hierarchy. Graduate students already know a lot about how to solve problems, and they can help undergraduates, and the more mature undergraduates can help the newer undergraduates, and so on. So I see graduate students playing a very important role. The other important place they play is we have a lot of undergraduates in laboratories doing research, and they don't have any sort of grounding in how that works. What do you do? What are the steps? Among others, safety. And graduate students are critical in that role of getting people started in research.
Probably have time for one or two more. Steve?
Hi, I'm Steve Cox. I think this is a follow-up to the previous question about, how to bring innovative teaching to the faculty. So it's one thing to point out, Anne and Alma's contributions, but I think those are quite rare. And I'm interested in how to actually create a culture where we can blur this line between science, between research and teaching, Ned. So I wonder what you guys think about the power of peer observation and creating a community where faculty are more aware of teaching innovation in their school or even outside their school. Peer observation where faculty are actually helping, they're observing what each other are doing in each other's classes.
Ah, I see. I think it could be very valuable. I'm worried that the culture among most faculty is, I already know how to teach. I don't need somebody to tell me how to teach. And that's probably inaccurate, right?
It's not assessment, it's observation.
Right, but with feedback, I assume, yes? I think it would be valuable to have people from different disciplines observe others and give them feedback. We don't have to, right? We're faculty, we don't have to listen. But I think it would be a valuable experience to see what came out of it.
Yeah, I kind of want to go to a coaching analogy, right? So there's all sorts of coaches in the world, and they can take a certain talent and bring it together as a team, and oftentimes the teams that win are not the best set of stars, it's the best set of people that know how to work together as a team. And coaches somehow, depending on who it is and what they're trying to do, figure out how to make that team come together and really excel. And mostly I think coaches have passion. They know their stuff and they're passionate about it. So I think a lot of times we worry about, how good is our handwriting and how organized are our thoughts, and do we have a lot of nice eye candy on the charts and so forth. And that probably helps, but it's maybe second or third degree of importance. If you have a professor who really just loves what they teach, even if they don't do a good job teaching, they somehow get you going. And they make you run that extra lap. You stay up late working on things because you want to sort of show them that you're learning and excelling and meeting their standards and trying to be passionate about the topic that they've turned you on to, right? And so for sure, there's a lot of tools that we should use and exploit. But somehow, to me, it comes back to the person and the ability to motivate others and get them to work together. And we've talked a lot about teams and, in sports, there's golf, right? So when Tiger's out there hitting, either he's playing well or he's not playing well, it's only Tiger by himself, right? Whereas in baseball or basketball, football, it's not one person. It's up to the team. And in fact, the subs and the coach, and you all have to come together. And a lot of times you have to do things under all sorts of, let's say, less than optimum circumstances. Life is full of that, right? So the scene in Apollo 13 where the guy walks in with a gym bag full of stuff and says, you got to take this thing and make it fit in this thing using that stuff in the next 30 minutes or they die. So, that's problem solving, right? Real practical stuff. And if you're a coach and you call a 30-second timeout, you're down 2 points, there's 5 seconds on the clock, how do you get that team to come together and execute something, right? The people that know how to do that, those are the guys that they're great teachers, they're great coaches, and they're all different. There's lots of ways to skin this cat. So I don't know that we should get too enamored of any one way, but watching a master perform and get results out of a team, you try to copy the best aspects that you relate to, right? So I think videotaping and letting people snoop on what other people are doing would be really, really good. And, having more awards for, we were just starting something in the School of Engineering called RT Awards, Research Teaching Awards. And it's not research in teaching, it's research and teaching. Italicize the and. So the Venn diagram is research and teaching almost on top of one another. Not you're a researcher or you're a great teacher, but you're both. And that's what we want at Rice. We want both. If you're just a great teacher, that's nice. If you're just a great researcher, that's nice. But we should be striving for both and blur the boundary between them. And then I think the outcome for the students, it will be a reason to pay outrageously high tuition and live in a really hot climate, because this is the best place on the earth to get an education and to learn how to lead other people and serve society. Top that.
I think you already answered.
It's not that hot today.
You just did, yeah.
I had a question. I think the teams are great and all that learning that way. I worry about people that might fall through the cracks in a team, and the people at the middle and the lower end of the bell curve, who I spend most of my time interacting with via email. So I'm thinking of the large lecture classes, and I know there's a lot of pressure to get them smaller and improve them, and I know departments have made a lot of suggestions, of what we should do to work with the administration to do that. So I'm just curious, of all the ideas from all the different departments of what they suggested, what were your favorites or least favorites? Or
Well, one of the things that we did, I guess, last fall was in response to the board providing funds to improve this, there's funding for additional instructors. And what I was very pleased about was that when I went to the departments of natural sciences and asked them for what they would like to do, every department came back with a different model. And each model served the needs of that department. So math has one model. They considered a great deal of teaching experience very important for the graduate students. Physics wanted to introduce breakout sessions, but where the person running the breakout session and the discussions was actually a PhD instructor, not a graduate student, not another student. And so I think, in fact, one model doesn't fit all, and the fact that you can let each department find their optimal way to use the funds to improve the experience and the education, not necessarily the classes are smaller or bigger or meet in different ways, but the way that they think is best for instruction. I found that very rewarding, and the departments were really happy, and the administration was very receptive to that.
Yeah, my answer to this would be to have a lot more sensors and a lot more feedback, and sort of almost real time. Because when you use the phrase fall between the cracks, that sort of means they flunked the mid-year, they haven't turned in problem sets for 6 weeks, and they're dropping the course, or they've already dropped the course, or they're just going to stick it out and get a D or hope for a D. So intervention, early intervention, right? It's kind of, if it's midterm and you're finding out you're not doing well, something's wrong there. And we have a lot of people at Rice that actually don't grade exams in timely fashions, don't get the homeworks back in timely fashion, so the students don't even know where they stand really with regards to their learning. So having multiple ways of assessing one's own progress and the instructors watching and being able to intervene so that everybody's successful, right? Wouldn't it be great that everybody comes and they follow their dream? I mean, sometimes maybe the dream is a STEM education, but for some reason, that math course or that physics course knocks them out of their STEM, and they have to do something else, and maybe they still stay at Rice, but they decide, okay, I'm going to do this other thing because I can, because I thought I was better at physics, or I don't have the background in vectors or whatever the heck it is. If they still have the passion, we ought to provide them some more intervention, let's use that word, and how you do that depends on what the topic is and so forth. And certainly learning in groups of other people and having others share the pain. And I remember when I was writing my thesis, I used to sit in the library a lot of times, because if I sat in the lab back in the office, I couldn't work as well as when I sat in the library. It was like this force field where if there were other people that were working and they were studying, I didn't know them, but I could see them. They were there. And that made me sort of like, okay, I can do this, right? And so sometimes it's just being part of a community and, I don't know, being able to not be afraid to say, hey, I don't know what the hell you're talking about, or help me on this. Maybe just saying help me is hard to do. For faculty, it's hard to do. We're supposed to know everything and be flawless and all. But when you say I don't know how to do something, that's when people will help you. There's a lot of people around here that like to show people how to do things. And maybe it's easier to do it when you don't know how to use a tool. But, you know, a physical tool is one thing, but, you know, mental tools, algorithms, computers, those are tools, right? How to look at problems how do you conceive and how do you simplify? All of those things are things that we can learn.
We have one last question.
Ned, I like your 3 ships, but a lifetime in Silicon Valley has taught me that there is a 4th ship, and it doesn't end in SHIP, but it's called collaboration. At Stanford, what we said was collaboration across science, engineering, and medicine, with a heavy overlay of entrepreneurship, is what makes the world go around. And to a large degree explains the phenomena of Silicon Valley. Could you comment?
Yeah, you're right. Part of the things I think we're trying to do and you're trying to do here in Houston is we got the Texas Medical Center, and we got Rice sitting right next to it, and there's a lot of money in people's pockets in Houston, but they oftentimes invested on the coasts, right? Not so much locally here. And so trying to build up an entrepreneurial community where people are excited about things and can go to places and get things done in a hurry is part of, I guess, what modern universities do. I mean, Silicon Valley is an outspring of Stanford and Berkeley and Boston and New York and so forth, all the great universities there. So if Houston's going to be, in the future, something really special about entrepreneurship and venture capital and so forth, it's got to be anchored by Rice, because we're here in Houston. So if we don't do it, probably won't happen. And University of Houston's coming along well, and it's could be a partnership with those folks, and UT Austin comes to town all the time, and Texas A&M they're coming to town because this is where the money is, this is where the action is. So be interesting to come back in 10 or 20 years and see where Houston is. Does some of these like the Rice Business Plan competition, OwlSpark, and these incubators and accelerators that we're beginning to play with. Silicon Valley was doing it decades ago. Finally, we're getting it here in Houston. Can we catch up, and can we do things better in different sectors than they can do on the coasts? Sure, worth trying. I know you care about this deeply.
Okay, I'd like to thank our speakers one more time.